Spider-Man Far From Home is one of the most underrated MCU movies of all time. Spider-Man is my favorite character ever in any piece of fiction, and while Spider-Man is my favorite character, the last couple of years have not been too kind to Mr. Peter Parker. Well, in terms of comics, outside media for Spider-Man, including the games, TV shows, and movies, have all been spectacular, no pun intended. But out of all of these great projects for Spider-Man, there is one Spider-Man project that seems quite divided and people really don't like that. And that project is Spider-Man Far From Home, the middle child of the new Spider-Man trilogy from the MCU starring Tom Holland. Now I know that many people aren't a fan of this movie and think it's easily the worst one out of the three, and I really disagree. I enjoyed this movie and it was way better than I expected, especially considering I was really not a fan of the previous installment, Spider-Man Homecoming, but that's another topic for another day. Now, I'm not saying this movie is perfect, it isn't, it has many flaws, like the inclusion of Mysterio being connected to Tony Stark. A lot of people, myself included, didn't like how this Iron Man was the Uncle Ben for Tom Spider-Man. And while I agree with this statement, I think this movie needed Iron Man's presence in a way. This movie is the first installment to the MCU after Avengers Endgame where Tony Stark, the main character of this whole franchise, died. And we also get to see Iron Man become a mentor to Peter Parker in Peter's short time in the MCU at this point. So to see Peter Parker deal with the stress of becoming quote-unquote the next Iron Man is genius. Even though Iron Man isn't in this film, you can feel his presence and influence in this movie, and the movie handled his death and the events of Endgame extremely well. For starters, I love how we left New York City and traveled to Italy. It reminds me of the early Amazing Spider-Man days when Peter would just leave NYC for a different city like Philadelphia, or even leave the country and end up in London. Leaving NYC gives this movie an entirely new take right off the bat, since we haven't left New York in the previous live-action Spider-Man movies like that. And I'm just going to say this right now, but the black and red suit that Peter gets at the end of this film is a top 3 Spider-Man live-action suit ever. And maybe I'm just being tricked by comic accuracy here, but the webs underneath the arms are just so cool, and the black and red suit with the webs underneath is just true cinema, honestly. It's amazing. I also loved how we see Peter's growth in this film, and from start to finish. You know, in the beginning of the movie, he just wants to relax and enjoy his life, and you know how stressful his life has been in the last couple of months. We also get to see the reason why he wants to relax for some time as well, is because of how much, you know, pressure he feels to be the next Iron Man. He doesn't want to do that, and not having anyone to talk to about, you know, he confides in Mysterio, which is a huge mistake since Mysterio is a bad guy. And we also see Peter not knowing who to trust and who he wants to be as a hero. But at the end of the movie, thanks to Tony's best friend, Happy, Peter learns to believe in himself and trust himself and bounces back from his mistakes. The next thing I loved about this film was Zendaya. Like most people, I was not a fan of her in Spider-Man Homecoming, and this movie completely changed her for the better. Zendaya is one of the best actors in recent years, but I feel like the way her character was written just didn't fit in Homecoming. But in this film, they fixed her, and she's great in this movie. Even though she is named after one of the most popular love interests in all of comics, Mary Jane Watson, I like how Zendaya is her own character. MJ from the MCU Spider-Man movies and Mary Jane from the comics don't act similarly at all, and I think MJ's tone and personality fit really well in this movie. You can see her chemistry with Tom Holland shine brightly in this film, and which carried over to No Way Home, and damn, it even carried in their personal life because now the two actors are dating. Another thing I loved was the humor in this movie. A lot of the MCU's humor for me is sometimes, you know, really hit or miss. Sometimes I have a genuine laugh, and other times the scene goes on for way too long and it's just not funny. But I think this movie handles humor very well, and Ned's relationship with Betty was just really funny to me. But all in all, I think the movie handled the humor in this movie very well. I think the humor in MCU Spider-Man trilogy overall is solid and works very well. I also think that the scenes where the humor doesn't work is not as annoying since, you know, the main characters are basically kids in high school. The best thing about this movie was one of the best actors of our generation, Cobie Smulders, gives off one of the best acting performances of all time in this movie, and she might be better than De Niro in Taxi Driver. I'm just playing, but Jake Gyllenhaal gives off a great performance in this movie and pulls off Mysterio very well in this film. The scene where Spider-Man gets tricked is so good because you genuinely can't tell what's real or not, and you also fear Mysterio in a way because he wants to destroy Peter, where in Homecoming you see where the Vulture is coming from and now he's actually not a bad guy. I like how they went in a completely new direction with the villain in this one, and it fits the tone of this film very well. I think Mysterio is one of the better comic book villains of the last couple of years, and the MCU also managed to get his goofy ass costume to look pretty good considering he wears a big ass fishbowl on his head. Another thing I enjoyed about Mysterio in this film is the scenes of him tricking and messing with Peter. When Mysterio tricked Peter into giving up his friends was one of my favorite Spider-Man moments on live action. I just think this movie is criminally underrated and should be talked about way more. Off the top of my head, I would take this movie over Homecoming, both of the Amazing Spider-Man movies, and Spider-Man 3. But that's just my opinion, and I'm curious to hear yours. Let me know down in the comment section what you think about Spider-Man No Way Home, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace.